Nobody in that room expected Roki Sasaki to cry. Not the reporters who had gathered for what was supposed to be a routine post-game press conference. Not the coaching staff seated along the back wall. Not even Dave Roberts himself, who had carefully chosen every word of the announcement he was about to make and had prepared for almost every reaction except the one he got. Because when Roberts finished speaking and the room turned toward Roki Sasaki, the 23-year-old pitcher from Iwate, Japan, didn't respond with the composed professionalism that had characterized every public appearance of his young major league career. His jaw tightened. His eyes went red at the edges. And then, in front of cameras that were broadcasting to every corner of the baseball world, Roki Sasaki lowered his head and began to cry. The room went completely still. And somewhere in the back, Shohei Ohtani, who had walked in expecting nothing more than a standard debrief after a hard-fought game, sat with an expression that nobody in that room had ever seen on his face before. Not confusion. Not sadness. Something deeper than both. The look of someone who had just been told something that rearranged everything he thought he understood. To understand what happened in that press conference room, you have to understand what had happened on the field in the 3 hours before it. The Dodgers had just finished a grueling extra-inning battle against the San Francisco Giants, a game that had stretched past midnight and had asked everything of every player on both sides of the diamond. It was the kind of game that leaves a clubhouse exhausted in a way that goes beyond physical tired. The kind of game that empties you out emotionally and leaves you sitting at your locker afterward in silence, staring at nothing in particular, trying to locate the energy to unlace your cleats. Roki Sasaki had started the game and had pitched beautifully through the first 4 innings. His split-finger fastball was moving with that late, diving action that had made him one of the most feared pitchers in Nippon professional baseball before his arrival in Los Angeles. His velocity was crisp. His command was precise. He looked, in those early innings, like the pitcher the Dodgers had envisioned when they signed him. And then the 5th inning arrived. And with it, something changed. His velocity dropped by 2 miles per hour, then 3. His release point shifted almost imperceptibly, but enough for the Giants' hitters to begin making contact in ways they hadn't been able to earlier in the game. By the time pitching coach Mark Prior made the walk to the mound with 1 out and 2 runners on base, Sasaki's pitch count was at 87 and his body language was telling a story that his face was working hard to contradict. He handed the ball over without argument, walked toward the dugout, and sat at the end of the bench with a towel over his head for the remainder of the game. The Dodgers eventually won in the 11th inning on a walk-off single by Freddie Freeman. But the celebration in the clubhouse felt muted. Because people inside that building already knew that something larger than the game's outcome was about to be addressed. Dave Roberts walked to the podium in the press conference room at 12:47 a.m. His tie was loosened. His eyes carried the particular kind of tiredness that comes not from lack of sleep but from the weight of a decision that has been sitting on your chest for longer than you want to admit. He thanked the reporters for staying late. He acknowledged the win briefly, saying the team had shown tremendous resilience and that Freeman's walk-off was the kind of moment that reminds you why this game matters. And then he set his notes on the podium, looked up, and said that he had something important to share before taking questions. He said that after extensive consultation with the Dodgers medical staff, the front office, and the player himself, the organization had made the decision to place Roki Sasaki on the 15-day injured list, effective immediately. He paused there, letting the information settle. Then he continued. He said the decision was based not on a single incident but on a pattern of data that the team's medical staff had been monitoring closely over the preceding 6 weeks. He said that Sasaki had been pitching through a stress reaction in his right forearm. Not a fracture. Not a tear. But the kind of structural stress that, left unaddressed, follows a very predictable and very damaging path. He said the team had identified the issue earlier than most organizations would have because of the advanced biomechanical monitoring protocols the Dodgers had implemented this season. And then he said the sentence that changed the temperature of the entire room. He said that Roki Sasaki had known about the forearm stress reaction for 4 weeks and had chosen, on his own, without informing the coaching staff, to continue pitching through it. The room turned toward Sasaki almost involuntarily, the way a crowd turns toward the source of a sound they weren't expecting. He was seated to Robert's left, still in his post-game clothes, his hands folded on the table in front of him. And he was already crying. Not loudly. Not dramatically. The kind of crying that a person tries to contain and cannot quite manage, the kind that escapes through the eyes and the tight press of the lips and the slight trembling of the jaw while the rest of the face tries to hold itself together. He reached up and pressed his fingers against his eyes for a moment. Then he straightened, exhaled slowly, and reached toward the microphone. His voice broke on the first word. He stopped, collected himself, and tried again. Speaking in Japanese, with a translator beside him converting each sentence carefully into English, Sasaki began to apologize. He apologized to Dave Roberts. He apologized to the coaching staff. He apologized to his teammates. He apologized to the organization that had believed in him and brought him across an ocean to be part of something he described as the greatest opportunity of his life. He said he had felt the discomfort in his forearm 6 weeks ago and had told himself it was manageable. He said he had been afraid. Afraid that if he reported it, he would be shut down. Afraid that he would lose his spot in the rotation. Afraid that the Dodgers would look at him differently, would begin to see him as fragile, as someone who couldn't handle the demands of a major league season. He said in Japan, he had been taught to push through pain as a demonstration of commitment. He said he had applied that lesson here, in this context, without understanding that the context was different. That the Dodgers didn't need him to prove his commitment by hiding what was happening inside his body. And that in trying to show them he was strong, he had put everything at risk. The translator finished the last sentence, and the room was completely quiet for a long moment. Roberts, seated beside him, reached over and placed his hand briefly on Sasaki's shoulder. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Shohei Ohtani had been seated at the far end of the table, scheduled to speak about his own performance in the game. He had gone 2 for 4 with a double and a walk, and reporters had questions prepared about his approach against the Giants' bullpen in the later innings. None of those questions got asked. Because after Sasaki finished speaking, a reporter turned to Ohtani and asked simply whether he had known about Sasaki's situation. Whether his teammate had confided in him at any point during the 6 weeks he had been managing this quietly on his own. Ohtani looked at the reporter. Then he looked at Sasaki. Then he looked back down at the table in front of him. Several seconds passed. Long enough that the silence itself became the story. Ohtani had been in professional baseball since he was 18 years old. He had navigated the transition from NPB to MLB. He had rebuilt his arm after Tommy John surgery. He had handled the scrutiny of being the most watched player on the planet with a composure that bordered on the supernatural. But in that moment, in that room, he looked genuinely at a loss. When he finally spoke, he did so in Japanese, his voice quieter than anyone in that room had heard it before. He said he had not known. He said he had noticed that Sasaki seemed to be working harder than usual on certain days, had seen him in the training room more frequently, had observed the slight changes in his delivery that a pitcher recognizes in another pitcher because he knows what certain adjustments are designed to conceal. But he said he had not asked. And he said that sitting in that room, hearing the full story for the first time, what he felt most deeply was not surprise at what Sasaki had done but recognition. Recognition because he said he understood the fear that had driven it. He understood what it felt like to come from a baseball culture where showing pain is interpreted as weakness. He understood the pressure of being a Japanese pitcher in an American system, trying to prove that you belong, trying to demonstrate that the investment the organization made in you was justified. He said he understood all of it. And he said that understanding it made it harder to sit with, not easier. He paused for a long moment after that. Then he added one more thing, still quietly, still in Japanese, the translator delivering the words into a room that was holding its breath. He said that when he had his own surgery, the hardest part was not the rehabilitation. The hardest part was the moment he had to admit that he needed it. He looked at Sasaki directly when he said the next sentence. He said that asking for help is not weakness. He said that protecting yourself is not selfishness. He said that a pitcher who is honest about what his body is telling him is more valuable to his team than a pitcher who hides the truth and loses everything in the middle of a season that still has 3 months left to run. Roberts addressed the medical and organizational implications of the situation for several more minutes after Ohtani finished speaking. He confirmed that the 15-day IL stint was a conservative starting point and that the timeline would be determined by how the forearm responded to rest and treatment. He said the Dodgers were optimistic about a full recovery but were not going to place any artificial deadline on the process. He said the organization did not view this situation as a breach of trust on Sasaki's part but rather as a moment that revealed a cultural gap in how injury communication was understood, and that closing that gap was now a priority for the front office and the medical staff working together. He said that effective immediately, the Dodgers would be implementing a new protocol for all players, and particularly for players who had come through the NPB system, that created a more structured and explicit framework for reporting physical concerns without fear of consequences. He said the goal was to build an environment where a 23-year-old pitcher from Iwate, Japan felt as comfortable telling the training staff that something hurt as a veteran who had been in the American system his entire career. He said that was on the organization as much as it was on the player. Maybe more. When the press conference ended and the cameras were being packed away, Ohtani remained seated at the table for a moment longer than everyone else. Sasaki had already left the room, guided out by the team's interpreter and a member of the training staff. A reporter who was still gathering his materials described watching Ohtani sit there in the emptying room, not on his phone, not talking to anyone, just sitting with whatever he was carrying in that moment. After about a minute, he stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out quietly. The kind of exit that doesn't invite questions. The kind that signals that some things are being processed in a place that cameras don't reach and words haven't found yet. The Dodgers had won the game. But what happened after it was going to matter far longer than the final score.